Welcome to another Forte Growth episode where we interview people doing awesome things online.
Welcome to the Forte Growth podcast. Today we're at Casey Botticello. So Casey's been on a few different podcasts. You probably heard his story before, but at least we try to dive a little deeper. So hopefully you get a little more out of this one, or a little more, in-depth chat versus some of the other podcasts that you may have listened to. So we go into his 35 site portfolio, mainly through his AI process. So how he goes through and generates it. We go into the weeds about that, his editing process on that, his monetization process, and what he's looking to do down the line. And what I really, really, really liked about this is we actually went down the niche selection route, because obviously listening to something like this is relatively inspiring. You may want to go do this and maybe a niche you're involved in. But we go down the process of how you actually select the right niche for this. I didn't hear this on another podcast with him. So this is unique to this one of how he's gone about doing that. And it's not just picking one niche, it's actually about picking two niches and putting them together. And you'll hear that at the end of the podcast. So make sure you listen in, sit back and enjoy. All right, welcome to the Forte Growth podcast. Today we have Casey Botticello. Is that how I say it?
Yeah, you got it right.
Damn, nailed it this time. Welcome, Casey. It's good to have you on. And I'm sure a lot of listeners have potentially heard some of your interviews because you've been doing the podcast rounds before. But for people who haven't, do you want to maybe just give a brief background about yourself?
Sure. I'm Casey. I'm the founder of bloggingguide.com. And I've had blogs or made money online through digital publishing for basically the last 5 to 7 years full time. And yeah, I use Blogging Guide just to sort of showcase my sort of public facing case studies and all the different digital marketing experiments and insights that I draw from those. But most of my work is on a portfolio of about 35 income producing blogs.
Okay, so you're a busy man there with 35 blogs. But you mentioned you've been doing 5 to 7 years of blogging. How has blogging changed for you at all from when you started to now in terms of your, overall processes, maybe from a macro zoomed out perspective in terms of maybe how a site is set out and maybe the content you're going after?
Yeah, no, and I had blogs before that 5 to 7 year period. I'd say that's when I started really doing it full time. But no, it's changed significantly. It was significantly easier to rank, of course, even just 2-3 years ago, for even fairly competitive keywords. You know, if you knew what you were doing, if you had the right on-page SEO, if you could, build a couple legitimate backlinks, that was kind of like enough, unless you were in a really competitive niche, basically. So the process now is much more targeted, almost surgical. I basically am looking for those real diamonds in the rough, those things that are listed as 0 volume keywords in Ahrefs or some other third-party tool, just because that'll help deter other people from going after it for a while at least, and give me a little bit of a head start. But also just because I can win those quicker. My general strategy has shifted. Now I'm trying to cover topics in their entirety, and topical authority is a big part of my strategy, but I'm also trying to rank as fast as possible and basically get Google crawling my site. So in my first few posts, I'm looking to win like a featured snippet on a site. Mm-hmm. So I need to look for something has enough search volume to justify that, but is, still obscure enough that even as a new site owner, I can write a killer article and I can possibly rank for it.
Okay, so it sounds like then if you're going after these 0 search volume keywords, you're going after these relatively long tail terms. I think, at least I'm sure a lot of people listeners may have probably seen this too, where a lot of, more authoritative sites, or the way Google is presenting in the SERPs now, a lot of these long tails aren't showing up for the exact match query on the SERPs. It's showing, for example, if you're looking for, does XYZ cause bloating or something? And then instead of it coming up with does XYZ cause bloating as the article, it's like XYZ side effects. And it's like more comprehensive. you're still able to rank your long tails in those SERPs, or are you just kind of looking to see what's there?
So I've noticed that too, and it has become harder. But the short answer is I'm only doing that at the beginning when I'm building a site. Usually, I'm basically just, like I said, you got to get those positive signals where Google crawls your site. They see that, you have really just blazing fast speed. You front load the answer right to the top of your article. So you're not doing things, even though I use a lot of display ads, I don't just bury the answer at the bottom and make you scroll through it. I'm, quick to give basically like an answer paragraph, basically right at the beginning. And I include a lot of visuals, a lot of custom content. So a lot of people have had problems where they get outranked by forums, Google, Quora, Reddit, right? And I'm in a couple of very UGC kind of centric niches, and I've had very little problem with that. I've definitely I'd say maybe 10% of searches for me have become like maybe unwinnable or significantly harder, but my traffic has continued to grow significantly. So again, it's going after the long tail keywords is really more just kind of where I'm starting with a lot of these sites. Then the focus is to basically build out topical authority. I'm very big on that. And whether that means like interlinking everything perfectly, directing all the flow of traffic to money pages, just writing killer meta descriptions, using AI to scale things. I mean, I kind of do all that just very detailed, and, it doesn't always work, but sometimes, you have a huge result. And if you use processes like AI, you can amplify those results. So I've had a few of those big case studies, which is why I've been on a number of the podcasts, because some of them have grown beyond my wildest expectations. So
okay, we will definitely dive into all of those as well. But I want to continue down this rabbit hole of some of your content. You mentioned you have a lot of visuals in your post. So when we're talking visuals, what are we talking? Are we talking stock images, original images, infographics? How are you generating, and what are you generating for these articles?
Good question. I phased out stock images along probably several years back. So
whoa, you're an early adopter.
Yeah, mainly because I found I could rank for so many image related searches that I was like, I'm just leaving money on the table by putting a stock image in when I know that, a million other people have used it. There's no way I'm going to rank for this image, that the image has been used a million times. So I'm looking for always sort of like, I have a million subscriptions to like different services, and I'll use like stock photo as the base layer of a design. And I actually do a lot of the graphic design myself. That's one of the things I've perfected a little bit over the past few years, enough that I don't have to outsource that constantly. So if I want to do a really good featured image, I'll do it myself. And that is how I win a lot of them. I have, usually some element of a stock photo, but it literally might be like an amalgamation of 6 stock photos where I pull the woman with the computer is cropped out of one. I design a custom textured background. I do a shadow effect. Like basically the level of detail that most people probably put into their like YouTube thumbnails, I would say is kind of like what I consider a custom image. And that's what I do. Now I do original photos too in the case of products. I don't have as much product photography as probably a lot of people, but whenever possible, yeah. And I like taking photos, so I don't mind doing like original photography. I love infographics. I feel like you can't lose with an infographic. Like if it's good and at all original, Google will definitely rank it. It's very hard for like AI right now to like replace stuff like that. So
I've tried.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come out very good.
No, and you have to kind of look for these things. Nothing lasts forever, but you want to build a moat if you're doing this not with a churn and burn kind of strategy. If you really want these to stick around. So I run everything constantly through a reverse image search in Google. And if I'm seeing anything remotely like it popping up or any match at all, I need to do more. So
are there any specific image dimensions or even infographic dimensions you're using that you find work best, just like maybe for like repurposing for social media and stuff like that? Like, for example, infographic can be so many different dimensions.
That's true. So I don't do as many of the 15 by like 1,000, like the Pinterest sort of like long layout, 3:2 or whatever ratio. I don't do a ton of those, but part of that's because my strategy doesn't revolve around Pinterest largely. I try to do custom dimensions, and I tend to stick to sort of more landscape actually oriented content. Part of that's because I can make cooler designs easier that way, just because I'm familiar with that. But it's also because, ultimately, if you're trying to steer people to your site, you have to think about how they're arriving at it. And ultimately, I care about desktop traffic a lot more than mobile. So I want to provide something that works on mobile. Of course, it needs to be optimized for that. But if you create content that lends itself to viewing it on a desktop, I've had big success. Like a typical site probably gets 70 to 80% of its traffic from mobile devices in a lot of niches. My sites tend to skew the other way. So, yeah. So, and I think that's partly because of the niches I choose, but partly because I make everything just like the type of content that you'd want to view on a desktop computer. It's a little hard to know how much of that, leads to what, but my guess is that if you give them multiple images, Google is probably, and if I just test search things with a VPN or something, I'll notice that my results on desktop tend to be different than the ones on mobile, and they'll usually include like my landscape featured images on desktop. So, I mean, on most of my sites, it's 5 times more valuable to have desktop traffic. So just from like an RPM perspective. So they're little things like that, but they do add up and make a difference. And again, not everyone's thinking about it that way. And so it gives you a little more flexibility.
Yeah, I like that. And you mentioned you have 35 sites, and let's dive into some of these. Are all 35 printing money for you?
So yeah, I have more, but 35, I was just looking at this because I get asked a lot, but also because I just was upgrading my hosting. I have 35 that I put on my premium hosting, and I use like kind of similar plugins and themes and basically all the nice stuff that I do for a site once it has potential. So a lot of those are new. A lot were started in like the past year or so here, but some have already shown a lot of promise. All of them are like, there's some that are just like getting a few hundred clicks a month, and they're like, they might have AdSense. Some of them I'm just testing things, so I don't have AdSense or anything even on them yet. So I would say probably 15 to 20 of them are like properly monetized. And then of those, there's 10 that make up the lion's share of the income. They were distributed evenly until this recent case study site kind of skewed it. But even then, like I have new sites that are approaching Mediavine level thresholds, and they're relatively new, not as fast as that other site, but there's definitely a pretty good diversity to the portfolio just in terms of the type of sites and the niches and content covered.
Nice. We will dive into your content generation process too. But before that, I want to dive a little bit into the monetization, because you mentioned display ads a lot and a little bit of the product stuff. Are you able to, if you're happy to share it, just like a general revenue number you're making per month? And then how is that split between display ads and affiliate or any other monetization method?
Right. So across those like 10 bigger sites, the case study site I featured from just purely display ads, that's the biggest right now, actually, in terms of just display ads. And that one is like 23K a month, maybe this month. If I had to guess, it's on track to basically beat last month. So
wow,
it's doing well. I have two more that are just below the pro Mediamine Pro threshold. So they're like, i.e. less than 8,300 a month on average. So more like 5 to 7,000. And then I have some pure affiliate sites that don't have any ads. I tend to separate my sites kind of by purpose. I usually don't use Amazon affiliates. Like I have some residual income from years of doing that, but I've pretty much stopped doing that. I try to focus on one good product or one thing that I can make convert and that I get 30% or something on, and they won't slash my rates. In fact, I can usually negotiate a higher rate. And that's like when I do affiliate stuff. But display ads outweigh affiliate. And I would say like this past month was like well over 50K. That one site is generating a good percentage of it, but it's not the whole thing. So
yeah. So does that mean then your affiliate sites are almost micro niche sites? Are they focused around that one product, or are they multiple products in that niche?
There's one that is a general site that like a more general high level software review-ish, let's say. And that one has been like the big earner for a long time. In fact, that was the number one site before this display ad one kind of went wild. Most of the others, though, are super niche down. And that's, again, kind of been just a reflection of, I know that I can survive longer the more focused a site is in terms of algorithm updates and stuff like that. I rarely see any impact from any of the updates. So I don't think that like EAT, the way Google emphasizes it, is probably like as real or big a factor, but the concepts behind it are valid just from a trust perspective and conversion. If I don't have my name on it, which I don't for most of the sites, then I'm having like a legitimate author persona that I've convinced either someone to partner indirectly or directly to lend their likeness, or I've, you know, in a few cases, not many, but I've acquired a couple sites where somebody had already, you know, started something, but I've really tried to keep like a personality attached to it. I've spent a lot of time building out sort of all the profiles, even of real people, like just associated with my sites. You know, we're internet marketers. We go on podcasts. We have like a pretty good knowledge graph usually for Google, but like even the average subject matter expert, they might have some publications, maybe some like citations in papers or trade publications, but that's not usually well organized, and it's not like consistently implemented in like the schema and stuff like that. So, because they're not thinking about that. So I a lot of times go out and I use a lot of the user generated platforms like Quora, Reddit, Medium, and I'm creating profiles for them. I'm boosting those. And like I said, I'll get them the right real content, but I mean, I'm making sure that it's all neatly packaged together. And if anyone were to manually review the site, I feel a little more comfortable knowing that there's kind of everything there. So,
yeah.
So
you mentioned you're a big fan of covering the topics in their entirety, or topical authority, and you have almost pure affiliate site because they don't have display ads, and then just more, I guess, more informational sites that are display ad based. But then I'm assuming on your affiliate site, you have a lot of info content on there if you're going to cover the topic entirely. So you're almost, I don't want to say leaving money on the table, but it's almost like a similar strategy for both sites. One just has affiliate content, just doesn't have display ads.
It is. So yeah, like basically this probably goes counter to a lot of, if you're an affiliate marketer listening to this, you're probably like, exactly, like, why would you not have affiliates? Like, you're basically, yeah, like you said, leaving money on the table. And the idea is that I do think there's some validity to having like people who are concerned about having too much in terms of ads affecting the user experience. While none of my ad sites have been crushed, at least none that I know of because of that, there's no obvious connection to me. I do worry about that long term. And the affiliate sites, I tend to spend more time creating custom pages where I'm like optimizing for the conversion. So those I get involved with like the UX like personally, whereas like, yeah, I have a lot of info content, but basically if a site gets big enough, I try to find things that can generate affiliate income from a relatively small amount of traffic. So pretty high commission affiliate things. Not many of those get insane traffic. If any of them did start to approach like 100K sessions, even 50, I'd probably put them on Mediavine too.
Gotcha.
Honestly, it's just that those I've kind of deliberately focused on. I don't really care about the traffic per se. I'm just looking for the amount of like the buyer intent, people that are actually going to make a purchase. So.
No, that makes sense. You mentioned almost the long-term effects of potentially some of these display ads with the way things are changing with cookie data and stuff. Obviously, you're making damn good money now from display ads. So is the plan just to ride it out until it potentially goes away, or you got something else in the works?
I do have things in the works, just like more because I like exploring different things. Like a lot of people, I have like rank and rents in progress. I have like 15 that I'm seeding right now with content. So maybe in a year from now, that'll be the new thing for me. But I think a lot of people aren't concerned enough about the end of third-party cookies. But counterintuitively, I've factored in that risk pretty well, I think. And basically, yeah, I've been collecting a lot of first-party data this past year. So if you are worried about the end of third-party cookies, the logical thing is not to abandon ship. It's to figure out like, well, how do I get around that? What's the next mechanism? Because I don't believe that display ads are just going to go away. It could get very volatile. It could be, far less lucrative or something. But that was also why I started using AI content, because if your income from the revenue from something's going down, the other way to make it viable is to just cut the cost. And the biggest costs were all the writers. And like, I'm a writer. I like having real writers, like a lot of respect. Like that's kind of how I started in all this. But that was a big relief. Like I used to have a huge team of writers and now I'm down to pretty much just me. And I have like virtual assistants and stuff that make kind of the overall work well. But I've really eliminated most of like my regular help, to be honest. And now like my margins are like 90+%. And I mean, it is all profit now, like basically like minus like hosting and like a couple themes but I can do all the other stuff myself. So again, it's how you value your time and kind of how you want the business to work for you. But I'm one of those people that I started building a team because everybody, of course, wants you to scale and build up and be bigger. Like it's almost like building an agency. But then I'm kind of like, well, to me, this was always supposed to be a lifestyle business where, I have a semblance of normalcy. I can just not worry about things if I don't want to. I don't have a boss. I don't want to become the boss. And like, I like having like my freedom. So while I am like putting in a ton of time right now, I think if I can keep it up for another year even or so, I mean, it's not like I'd be done, but I'd have a pretty robust...
Have a good nest egg.
Yeah, I think so. Like anything, you got to plan for the future. And blogging's changed many times over the past 15 plus years, like the ways you'll make money. So I've seen that. But at the end of the day, if you just stuck the course this entire time and kept building, you probably would have come out ahead in most cases. Like there were periods where you would have been, if you chose YM wild niches, you would have been wiped out during Panda or Met. There were all sorts of things like that. But if you have like just hobbyist sites, if you have like kind of your typical review sites that don't touch on like health specifically, you're pretty, like I said, you'll get hit every now and then, but even if those sites do get hit, it doesn't really matter. Worst comes to worst, they become a link farm someday. There's people out there I see on Twitter, who make a ton of money from sites that were once somebody's passion project. And maybe in 5 years, that's what I'll have like a ton of. I'll be the person with 100+ sites. That's fine with me. I like creating content. I like having an impact, and I think it's fun. And I love reverse engineering algorithms and systems. So it's like people want you to almost preemptively give up and just be like, oh, no, like you can't beat Google. This isn't going to work. No, I'm still making money today. Like last night was still like, a few grand while I slept from sites I haven't worked on in months. So no, it works. Like, that's why I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic that big changes are coming. And I definitely have thought about de-risking, and some of the sites will probably be repurposed too. Like you said, I'll add ads when I would have kept them affiliate just to juice the numbers. Some I'll add affiliate links to. I just haven't had time to go back because there's so many sites. But those are like good problems to have. So my main focus is content production, and a lot of it. So that's why I'm big on AI right now, even if I heavily edit it.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue as well, because you've obviously beaten Google in your words before. So I'm going to use that for you too. So I think a lot of people, including myself, with AI have, let's just call it, problems around. A lot of fluff comes out of AI. You have to go and like you're editing it. Like I pretty much have to rewrite most of the AI I get back, which is just a pain in the ass. It sure gives me a little bit of maybe a little look, and some things I can keep, but it needs to be edited so bad. So I want to know kind of your process around AI, because you're obviously publishing a shit ton of content, 35 sites, getting a lot of content up. How are you streamlining that process, and what does your, I guess, output and editing process look like, and maybe even the software you're using as well?
Yeah, so it is hard. I don't have a perfectly refined process where it's like, oh, now my articles are coming out and they're like ready to go. Unfortunately, like that's why I'm still spending a lot of time in this. Is AI only gets you part of the way there. I wish I could give someone like the answer, like you use these prompts and you'll never have to work again. Like, but that's just not. Now in the future, like that's the other reason to stay up to date and tinker with AI just in general, is that, think how far we've come in just like less than a year. Like in another year, that might be a totally different, story. Like AI might be able to produce things for like at some point that are truly like one click, publish, and that would be great. And there'll be like a very narrow window there where some people will make a small fortune and then the internet will die or whatever. So, but if you have to be in the right place kind of and know what you're doing to optimize for that. So I'd say there's good reasons to stay up on AI, because you might find a creative use for it. And that's like the sites that I work on. I'm not like doing the typical like niche site, like keyword research to find these topics. I'm looking for things where I just run everything through AI, and I basically just see what AI does well with. And the answers are not always obvious. There are certain topics that I thought AI would never be able to write about. and it gets the first draft much closer than you might think. I don't hear a lot of people like testing this, but I think that's kind of a wasted opportunity. Trying to use AI to fit into your existing business is really hit or miss because it just might not work. And you might be wasting your time. You might be producing suboptimal content just to sort of fit AI into your existing framework. I think that unless you happen to be lucky and already kind of found a great way to use it, you should view AI as a sandbox of sorts where you're testing, different ideas that you wouldn't have otherwise pursued. I have a site that I write every word, blogging guide, and I wouldn't ever have AI do that. And I like that site, and that's a passion project. But there are so many other things that AI is great at writing about. And like I said, you don't really know what those are until you test it. I'm sure there are people that have tested it, but they're not like sharing this information, not for free at least. So, like it's still early enough that if you're willing to test it out, you can get pretty far. Now, to answer your question more specifically, the tool that I am an affiliate, but like I'm an affiliate for everything. So I'm not a Koala shill, but I use Koala, and mainly just because I was on the Fat Stacks forum and I saw it being kind of built in real time based on like a lot of the feedback that people like me, people who are like info content writers gave the creator, Connor. And since he was like building it for us, it just was the tool I became familiar with. And it's not the cheapest. Like there are cheaper tools out there. I'll say that right off the bat. But you've already gotten the cost down so much with a tool like with any AI tool that in my mind, that's not where you should be splitting hairs. Is this article's 30 cents versus this article's 80 cents. You've already got rid of the like $50 to $150 writer. That's the big like cost saving. You should be focused on then what can get you to the best first draft basically as soon as possible. And for me, and again, that's based on the niches I test, that's been Koala. But I've tried others. I just haven't seen quite the same output. But part of that is because I'm probably just more familiar with it, to be honest. So I use Koala for a lot of first drafts. Honestly, like at the beginning, I was really kind of cautious with it. And now I way overproduce content. Like if I know I need one article, I'll generate using a series of prompts, like 5 articles. And I'll like sometimes even take the best sections of each and sort of like, that's one way of speeding up the editing process. Like,
what would be some examples of prompts you would use between those 5 drafts?
Well, the nice thing about it, about AI is that by design, these systems are trying, like they do generate unique articles every time. So as long as you leave you give it a specific enough prompt that it knows what you're trying to write about, but don't give it too many parameters. Like it will produce different articles. And so like, I know that sounds like maybe overly simplistic, but
so you just generated the same article 5 times from the same prompt,
basically. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And now sometimes that'll be specific. If I see what the problem is for a topic, if most of the articles sound robotic, I'll change the persona or the tone I have assigned to the writer. And I use a lot of the more informal ones. So like Koala has a friendly mode, which sounds kind of silly, but that works. And like professional mode, I always say don't use the SEO mode, the default one, because it's already SEO optimized. And I use the free version of ChatGPT a lot too, just to run things through. And if anything, that's where I'm customizing, but like having a dialogue basically with it about how to make the article good. And I'm saying, okay, I've written this so far. What would be some points that I haven't considered? And maybe that's where I, get some great ideas sometimes from Chat GPT that, basically I wouldn't have come up with, and the keyword research didn't, or the people also ask questions didn't, suggest those topics. And it really is like having a subject matter expert if you know what you're doing with it, because it has access to so much information. So I use it a lot in the ideation and like editing phase. And it can churn out content still so fast. Usually it's the whole article doesn't need to be rewritten. You can usually do that. I always write the intro. Like I'll say that
Yeah.
I think a good hook is important. I think if you were going to eventually automate YouTube, the one part you would probably keep the same is do some sort of intro or top level summary about the podcast guest, and you'd add like a couple sentences of commentary. So I would do that for the article. I run all the titles through GPT, and it's good with those. It's not hard to come up with kind of like punchy copy for good titles. It can do that pretty well. It can do the meta descriptions really well, which I used to waste a lot of time on. So honestly, a lot of the sites I see don't even have custom meta descriptions. Like before you get to perfecting content, make sure your site actually has everything, it's checking every basic on-page box. If you don't have custom meta titles, if you don't have custom meta descriptions, you're like leaving money on the table already. But if you've mastered that, and yes, you think your content really is great and you're trying to produce new content, then yeah, you could also take out pretty much all the transition sentences. Again, remember, I'm adding a lot of visuals. So usually there'll be a few different tables. That's something Chat GPT has gotten better at generating too. And, you can just copy and paste those. Like you can literally give it data and it'll just quickly format it for you. So again, it's not a hack in like, oh, I can perfectly outsource this to somebody. No, you need to become like the AI wrangler, the AI expert. Like at the beginning, I thought I could outsource that. And that was the goal, was I would do this one side as like a case study. And then I could show someone with SOPs how to do it. And site may have been a wild success, but the outsourcing was not. I tried people. I like, of course, I loved that. To me was like the holy grail, right? If I could have produced infinite content and I had only to pay editors, I could go after 1,000 niches. But at least for me, that's really hard to do well. And like I said, there's not many people are experienced with this stuff. I mean, it's only been around a short period of time. So the people that know what they're doing can charge a lot. I mean, it'd be like finding somebody like me. Sure, I'll do your AI content for 1,000 an hour, but again, that gets away from the cost-effective model. So I think if you're willing to dive in and become like kind of the AI operator, I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think that probably there's just value in that in general, to understanding how AI systems work, whether it's just basic prompt engineering or it's actually just like testing models and understanding, how to coax out sort of the best response or different responses that nobody else can get. There's an art to that for sure. So all AI content is not equal. So
how long does it take you to do an article then?
It's good. That's kind of like my new metric. So I'm glad you asked. That's what I focus on. So far it's been a pretty consistent distribution of when I start a site, like a new site, and I'm not like an expert at it and I need to do a lot of research. The articles at the beginning, well, they can be even longer, but let's say on average 4 to 5 hours an article. So again, I'm not talking about some quick process. Obviously, you start doing the math. That's the first 100 articles. That's a lot of work. But by article 30 to 50, I've probably gotten that down I probably cut that in half. I probably am like 2 to 3 hours. And on almost every site, by the time I get to 1,000 posts, 700 to 1,000 posts, I seem to have kind of, for that niche, perfected it. And I can get it down to an hour or under an hour and a half. And there's some niches where I've gotten it even lower, but I can't get it below an hour. That's kind of like an hour per post. And that's like the sweet spot. If you can do that, like it's still a lot of work. I mean, that's ignoring the ramp up time. Even 1,000 posts at that hyper fast speed, 1,000 hours is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of time. We're talking like a full-time job. But if you want to do this relatively quickly, again, I think that's the key is it can't be something easy enough that everybody will be willing to do. And that's why I think some people are still outsourcing and they don't want to embrace AI themselves. That their interpretation of AI is that it should make them do less work. And that's like a nice concept, but in practice, at least right now, until I think people have a better understanding of it, what it really allows you to do is just the people that know what they're doing produce more and they can produce at scale, not an infinite scale. So it's still constrained by how much you can do as an individual contributor. But I think that's good news because most people start off as a team of one, right? Like the people that already have 30 employees writing, maybe it's not even worth, like I said, it's been really hard to learn how to sort of master AI content production. I don't see any reason to, like, if you have cheap enough writers who are producing good enough content, then maybe you just stick with that because it's kind of hard to change what's, already working. But if you're like getting into this, and I think like a lot of people are always on the fence, they want to start and there's that inertia, but they're like, oh, it seems like the worst time. Everybody's talking about doom and gloom with, especially if they're like, look at SEO related stuff. And I'm like, you used to have to like really write like content, between all the tools and AI software, a non-writer can produce so much more content than the best writer could even, 3 years ago. So I think really it opens the door and arguably is like the best time for someone to, who doesn't have a huge budget, because it if you're scrappy, and again, you still have to do all the other things. I still have to think about link building. I still have to think about, citations or just like brand mentions. And that's like a big focus. Like you have to understand like all the principles. There's no way. So learning about SEO is still a good thing, but on the content side, you can definitely increase your content velocity. And that to me is like everything. So
how are you splitting those hours between 35 sites? And are you just going all in on one for a month or two and then shifting to a new one?
Kind of. First of all, some of them are basically done or I've like kind of finished them. So there's like 5 that are in full maintenance mode. Like I covered the topic in its intended authority, and that includes that case study site. And I'm only going to add a couple posts a month just for the hell of it, basically. I don't know if that's really necessary, but why not? If I find a good, especially if the site has any newsworthy components, I'll jump on those to try to get some like backlinks. But I'm only adding a few of those per month. Most of those articles don't take long because I've already kind of perfected the site at that point. Right now I have 3 sites that I'm working on day to day where I'm like in bulk, like producing images. I'm like I'm going through and they all have their own branded style. Like they might all have the same gradient color overlay with some like little dots or, neat little elements. Like I find ways to do that. And I try to batch that process. So usually each day I do one task. So like I'm on image creation work. Today, I was sort of doing like all the link related work kind of internally, just making sure everything is correctly formatted. When you're producing this much content too, it's easy to start overlooking things. And like you could have a bunch of orphan content without realizing it. So that's what I was doing today across 3 sites. But I tend to batch the work and I basically work on, let's say 2 to 3 sites for probably 2 to 3 months because of the amount. I could probably do a site in a month, but again, since I'm doing multiple ones, I get those launched and seeded. And I have a pretty good process for that part. Like the first 50 posts, I actually can do pretty systematically because the site setup, I can do that in a day per site. I have enough randomly generated legal pages and everything ready to go at this point. I'm literally just cloning my site. And then usually I change the theme just to give it a little unique look to it. So they're not all identical generate press sites. But other than that, systematizing it makes a big difference. And working on the 2 to 3 sites and then switching, letting those age, and moving on to the next 2 to 3 sites. So like I said, you're not going to see the results right away. And that's why while everyone focused on that one site in the case study that did well, there was another site in there that I actually mentioned throughout. And that site was like the failure site. But that site now is actually reaching Mediavine levels itself. It just took 8 months longer. So if you have the patience and you just think of it as kind of like farming and you're just, like I said, seeding content, letting it age, waiting 6 to 12 months, build some backlinks in bulk, look at where things are at, pick the winners, kill off the losers. And there is some content, like some site-wide pruning that goes on. So I'm trying to balance that because part of me is, just keep it. Like keep all the sites. Let's see what happens. But you can tell usually after a year pretty much if a site's going to have a high growth potential or the ceiling for traffic is high. That's usually clear. So I am starting to get rid of some sites as it's clear that maybe it was a good idea. It just didn't work for whatever reason. I have some of those too. And again, I don't think of those as failures. Those are just other data points to cross off the list and narrow my focus on the other ones. So
nice. And does your AI generation and editing process differ between your affiliate content and your info content?
It does. Info content for me is much easier. That is my bread and butter. And that's sort of like, I feel like, again, it may not last forever, but I know how to do it right. The affiliate content, it's more like I take advantage of AI to test the water to sort of find where these hyper niche opportunities are. And then I end up spending more time focused on for the affiliate content, negotiating a better rate and finding the affiliate partner, optimizing, like creating special pages and like tweaking like button colors. I do all that stuff. So like I put a lot more time into the affiliate content. I don't publish nearly those many posts or pages. So the number I was quoting before of ranging from 1 to let's say 4 to 5 hours, that's for info content. I'm sure the affiliate content per page is actually much higher just because I have far fewer pages on the site. But for those, I do end up doing a lot more. I interject a lot more of my personality, or I try to find real people who, are using it and bring sort of that perspective into it. And part of it is that I'm actually bringing subject matter experts in on the affiliate sites. Because to me, that's where you need the social proof is definitely the affiliate sites. Like if I'm looking for a product, I don't want something without a name or like a faceless sort of authorless post. Like I want to see, ideally someone who has like a YouTube channel. So one of the best strategies I could offer, and there's probably like a lot of money to be made just doing this. Like I would pay for this, but like just reaching out and making those partnerships, find someone who has a YouTube channel in your niche and just partner with them and offer them some sort of split. I've stumbled across a lot of these people because they were advertising their services as a writer, but I think that'll be my focus later in this year is actually just kind of cold reaching out to some successful channels and being like, hey, have you ever considered having like a parallel blog? You could make all this money and we'll split all the ad upside, that kind of thing. So partnerships, probably a big future thing too. But again, right now I'm just trying to perfect kind of the content production model. And part of that's because I have to prove that to all the people that I'm going to be partnering with. You got to come at them with big numbers. You got to say, I took this site, like multiple sites and, brought it from 0 to at least 5,000 a month. And if you show you can do that like 10 times, then yeah, you have a pretty good track record. So
nice. And you mentioned link building, branded mentions, and some other off-page things. So how are you going about that process?
Well, one funny thing is, because there's been all that chatter on Twitter about the business card fiasco. Yeah. Well, this is a funny thing. I didn't mention this in any of the other podcasts, but with that case study site, I didn't even think to mention it because, again, why would I? But prior to that announcement that Google made, but I actually did go to events for this site and like connect with people. And one thing I did, of course, was I created custom business cards with a QR code that linked to my blog.
That was the secret.
And people have wondered, and myself included, how did it thrive through all these updates? And I I'm like, I don't think that actually has anything to do with it, but I do think it's like not a bad idea to like getting direct traffic and getting branded searches is important. You can pay someone to give you a bunch of bogus traffic, but it's much harder to manipulate like branded searches. So like people that are just like, treat it like their real business and they're just hustlers and they're like, like telling everyone, their family, friends, they're like, pull it up on your phone right now. Pull up the Forte Growth podcast. I want to see it. Like and subscribe.
People should do that while listening to this.
Yeah. So, and I think too, it's a bit naive to think like Google tracks like a ton of data. Forget whatever lip service they're paying, but getting rid of third-party cookies. There's no privacy. Like it's just all going to shift. So, I mean, they own YouTube. So let's start there. Like automatically this podcast will generate, you can basically like transcribe it and the closed captions will automatically more or less generate. So that means that like Google, presumably if they wanted to, could look into videos for, we're talking about these real brands out loud, these things that are getting featured in case studies. I'm not saying that's what's driving it or like by itself, the main factor, but I think that's one of those things. That's why it's good to get out there and promote your products and your sites. And if you can't be the face of that, then that's when you need to bring someone else in because, it's not just for trust. I think it's actually those branded searches, like even if you only generate like 20 a month for some things, that's a lot. Like 20 people searching for your show, your store, your product, your course. For some searches, that's enough to like, get you to page 1, like for competitive terms versus 1,000 like organic clicks. Like you'll see a quicker movement with the brand searches. So
you'll see Casey's business card course in the description.
Yeah.
But what are you doing? What are you doing outside of that? What are you doing for branded mentions and for links? Is there something else you're specifically doing, or is it more like the news content that you mentioned earlier?
Just because I've been trying to keep things lean, I used to do more like traditional, like I'd work with agencies and I'd do like Haro and like all the link outreach kind of everything. I came from like the digital PR sort of world prior to this. So I forget, but I do a lot of that just by myself. Most people are like, oh, I need someone to help me. And I'm like, no, you don't need any help. You just, go like quickly figure out someone's emails and send them a message like with some incentive. People will respond, not many, but a few every now and then. And I've had pretty good luck just connecting with people in the niche that I'm in, even if it's using the persona's profile. And if people see you're in the niche, they're more likely to respond. And frankly, those are the backlinks you really want. Like, it's great to get a DR 70 plus backlink, but in a vacuum, it's better probably to have like 2 DR like 20 or 30, but hyper niche relevant, like competitors in most of your SERPs. That's who I would want the backlinks from, even if it's a legit blog insertion, but it's a much bigger one. Like I said, for me, the topical sort of authority and the map you're building for Google is everything. I mean, Google's not doing a great job right now with the SERPs, but one thing it is good at, I think, measuring probably is sort of the semantic or like topical relevance of things. Like, it can probably do that fairly well. So I think it's pretty safe. And I've read through all the patent stuff like over and over. And I like, yeah, I spent a lot of time on that. So topical authority, I think, in a broad sense, is a really good thing to think about. And you have to get your name out there somehow. You have to get other people talking about it to send signals. It's the same as a backlink. You have to share content in order for someone to link back to you. That's how Google's basically worked since the beginning. And I view them basically as like the same thing. Like, those are the two most legitimate signals are like links. And then, like I said, they don't need to all be links though. This is probably where some PR agencies get screwed, to be honest. Like, when they do a good job for a client, I imagine people get all sorts of unlinked, but like branded sort of mentions. But the idea that Google doesn't recognize those at all, I'm not saying they would count them the same, but why would Google ignore that? I'm pretty sure they can figure out that, just because someone gives you a no follow link, I don't think that doesn't count for anything. Like, I admire a lot of link builders and stuff doing that, because honestly, I think they get screwed over a lot of the time just because they work hard. Like, it's hard to attribute, the success. So my general advice to people is, the best person to do that though, if you're a small, business, basically is you, because you're the only one who's going to pay attention close enough to really notice what matters. Even if you have the best link builder, they're just not focused exclusively on your site, and they can't you can get better attribution if you're focused on your own product and your own site.
Nice. I have one more question for you, Case, before we finish up, and it's around niche selection. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm going to dive in and try this AI thing, but I'm sure a lot of people may be thinking, oh, I'm going to do it in supplements, gardening, or recipes, these big niches. How are you finding these niches that are working with some of this AI info content?
If it's any niche like that, like gardening, health, supplement, the answer is no. Broadly speaking, don't do that. The answer is that's almost just too broad, even if, regardless of whether it's AI content or not. If you're just starting, you could win, but you're not going to, is the short answer. You need to get more specific. But
how specific are we talking? Like, so if I went in the supplement rabbit hole and I could go supplements, okay, protein powders, is that even specific enough, or would you have to go even more specific, like vegan protein powders?
Because that is a pretty big one, I would go more specific. I would go with the vegan protein powders. In fact, I would do like the intersection. Like, I think of everything as like multiple niches intersecting. So I'd have the intersection of vegan protein powders and caring for like a parenting crossover, like that would be like how specific I would get with the site. Like I would look for, because,
like vegan protein powders for mums kind of thing.
basically. Yeah. And like how that, and that makes sense to some extent, because, usually you're not just making like a health choice in a vacuum. There's usually something that causes that. And again, that's important to think about, because now you're narrowing your audience. You have a pretty clear persona. The example I give, just because people have asked, is kind of this concept of like stealth wealth, which is sort of this term that informally kind of refers to like people who are like maybe like big on financial independence and early retirement, sort of as it intersects though with like privacy and all sort of the related issues that stem from that. These are two subsets already. Like most people are not financially independent or early retired, but there's a lot of people aspiring to be and reading content like that. And there's a lot of privacy oriented people out there, but that intersection where it's exclusively content that pertains to both. So, these are people that have unique problems. They're like, how do I tell someone I'm dating that I'm like 40 and retired? Like there's all these very specific challenges that will never show up in Google search results, partly because people don't know what to search for them. There's not like a great like catch-all phrase for that problem. I mean, it's a really long tail, search. So you need to think about what people would actually like, where there are like complex problems. And, I look for stuff that's like said, not in Google. If I'm seeing auto completed results, that means there's volume, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for like, this is a big topic, but this subtopic of these two intersecting topics, like has all these questions related to it, like how do I keep my personal financial information private? Where are the best like safe deposit boxes? How can I hide my money in precious metals? Not suggesting any of that. I'm just, someone who's into that, probably you can build out a profile pretty quickly. And the temptation is, if you're a normal blogger, you'd start doing this and you'd be like, okay, bank accounts, you'd see like that people are like best offshore bank accounts. This group loves that. Like tax evasion, here we come. That's the whole group. But what they would do is they'd do one good article about the Cayman Islands, and then they would be like, well, okay, so I wrote about banking in the Cayman Islands, but should I just go down the list? And I'm hitting like Andorra, Aruba, like alphabetically go through. But like you get to Canada, I don't think, as far as I know, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I don't think people go to Canada for tax evasion purposes. I don't think their banking system is particularly lax. And so that's a good sign to Google when you start covering things that sound similar, but really have nothing to do with what the core audience would ever search. But if you're like an SEO guy, you probably think,
you cover every country.
Yeah. And there's a ton of search volume for like Canadian banks. Like you could probably get millions of clicks from that. But again, that'll only be temporary until Google realizes that your site is supposed to be about this hyper specific part of the industry. You're not really talking about this. So I think that's when Google says don't write for SEO, that's like the example I would give. That's just purely chasing like search volume. We all know that. There's no reason you would write that, So I think if you keep things like that in mind, I think you can still start a new blog. And I would honestly, like, just a page out of my own book, I would say, if you really want like a surefire thing, focus on an up and coming like tech, like product, niche, whatever. Because if you pick something that's new and trending, there's almost never like a legacy media incumbent that's going to like constantly steal your articles. Like, you'll still deal with Forbes occasionally and stuff like that. But if you really niche down, is Forbes covering, they might cover VR like kind of broadly, but are they covering, VR as
Apple Vision Pro?
Yeah. Or like how that is maybe used in education. Like that would be a good one. Everyone's of course looking at crazy videos of people like sitting around doing nonsense, but what about like an application, which I'm just thinking this off the top of my head, but I would assume there's like a legitimate and educational purpose too, that you could take students through in a classroom and explore different countries and cultures. That sounds brand friendly to me. And I would do that in a heartbeat. Like, I think I might do that now that I said that. So but I'm just saying, if you got to niche down and overlay like multiple perspectives and topics.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. That's a really good explanation. This has been an insightful podcast, Casey. We've gone well over, so we'll be mindful of your time. But where can people find you and follow you and keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, so the best place is probably just bloggingguide.com. And that's where I share pretty much all my case studies. And if you need to contact me, you can do so through there. I'm also on a couple of the social media platforms at Casey Botticello. So
perfect. And we'll have those all linked up in the description for everyone. But thanks for coming on, Casey. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, James.